The sun hadn't yet risen when armored vehicles rolled past the gates of Ouagadougou's presidential compound, bearing foreign insignias. By the time President Ibrahim Traoré finished his morning prayer, his Minister of Defense whispered one chilling sentence into his ear. "Sir, they're here for you." What followed wasn't just a breach of sovereignty. It was a betrayal from supposed allies. But when the cameras finally turned on, it wasn't Traoré who was handcuffed. The world watched live as the unthinkable happened. But how did a man they came to arrest end up standing taller than them all? The streets of Ouagadougou were still cloaked in sleep when the Nigerian convoy rolled through the city's southern checkpoint. It looked ordinary enough. Two diplomatic black SUVs bearing official plates followed by a third, unmarked and silent. Inside that third vehicle, Colonel Edwin Okoro, head of Nigeria's covert Omega unit, scrolled through the final version of the mission dossier. It was stamped with a crimson seal, Operation Silence, eyes only. The official story was simple. Border, security talks, counterinsurgency cooperation, and a renewed bilateral trade agenda. But deep within the sealed envelope handed to Okoro before leaving Abuja was something far more dangerous. A classified order authorizing the extraction of President Ibrahim Traoré, dead or alive, should he resist. No international court, no official record. Just a cleanup plan drafted in the shadows by powerful men, terrified of a young leader who was inspiring a continent. At the Nigerian embassy in Ouagadougou, Ambassador Ngoy Maneo rehearsed her lines in front of a mirror, voice steady, hands trembling. She had been told the speech was symbolic, a distraction while the operation played out behind closed doors. But what they hadn't counted on, what no document in Abuja dared admit, was Traoré's network. Veterans of the Sahel Wars, loyalists. From Sankara's forgotten battalions, young hackers with one foot in the military, the other in cyberspace. By the time the sun broke over the city, the trap had been set. But not for Traoré. For those who thought sovereignty could be kidnapped before breakfast. They didn't fear his weapons. They feared his words. In less than a year, Ibrahim Traoré had done what no one in West Africa had dared. He stared down. French military commanders tore up long-standing foreign agreements and sent soldiers in patched uniforms to reclaim airstrips once guarded by NATO-trained forces. His speeches, broadcast from modest podiums, ignited sparks in Mali, Niger, and Guinea. Sparks that began to burn old loyalties, replacing them with something far more dangerous. Hope. In Nigeria, President Tinubu's cabinet met behind sealed doors. The reports were unsettling. Students at Ahmadu Bello University were quoting Traoré in debate clubs. Soldiers in Borno whispered about a Sahel alliance that would answer only to African soil. It was Charles Bakare, the hardline minister of internal affairs, who finally said what no one else dared. If we wait, he becomes a symbol. If we act now, we can still call it prevention. Bakare and Ambassador Nagi Mimano had built their careers silencing insurgencies in Nigeria's north. Both had overseen brutal crackdowns disguised as peacekeeping operations. They saw in Traoré not a diplomat, but a wildfire moving eastward. To them, Burkina Faso's transitional leader wasn't just young. He was uncontrollable, untied to Western aid, immune to bribes, revered by soldiers and civilians alike. Worse, he wasn't asking for a seat at the table, he was flipping the table. So, when intelligence reports claimed he planned to meet with Tuareg commanders from northern Mali, it triggered a signal. Mimano made the call. Deploy Omega. No leaks. No second chances. Because if Traoré succeeded in uniting the Sahel, it wouldn't just destabilize Nigeria's influence. It would redefine who held the pen when Africa's next chapter was written. The marble floors of the Kosiam Palace gleamed under the morning light, cameras clicking as journalists packed the briefing hall. Flags of Burkina Faso and Nigeria flanked the podium where President Ibrahim Traoré was scheduled to speak alongside Ambassador Ngoy Maneo. It was meant to be symbolic, two nations discussing unity, trade, and the fight against insurgency. But Symbols like silence can be weaponized. Midway through the introductions, a suited man in the Nigerian delegation leaned toward one of Traoré's aides and whispered, "His Excellency is requested in the West Wing for a confidential discussion." The Kai phrasing was polite. The timing was not. Traoré narrowed his eyes, nodded slowly, and handed his notes to his chief of staff. "I'll be back in 5. As he disappeared down the side corridor, his security detail noticed something strange. 3 new faces, not previously logged with the diplomatic list, loitered near the hall's side exits. One wore a communications earpiece, not standard for press handlers. Another adjusted a coat heavy enough to hide restraints. It wasn't raining. Outside, the usual convoy of diplomatic sedans had been swapped. Black SUVs, military-grade, armored, idled near the exit, their windows tinted pitch dark. A drone buzzed faintly overhead. Its camera pointed not at the palace roof, but the rear courtyard. Inside the West Wing, Traoré entered a room with no interpreters, no notebooks, no official photographer. Just 4 men in suits and 1 steel briefcase resting on the table. Mimano stood by the window, silent. Then came the sound, barely a click, from a belt holster behind him. Not loud, but unmistakable. The sound of cuffs being readied, not for peace, but power. That was the moment Traoré knew. This wasn't diplomacy. It was an ambush dressed in protocol. The hall outside the West Wing held its breath. The press conference continued, but the energy shifted. Aides glanced at their watches. Security shifted uneasily near the walls. Something was wrong. In the fee, operations room beneath the palace, Colonel Sekou Zida, Traoré's intelligence chief, listened intently as a scrambled transmission came through a redirected satellite feed. A sharp voice, unmistakably Nigerian, clipped through the static. "Extract the target within the hour. No media. Ensure full diplomatic cover." Zida froze. He replayed it once, twice. The code matched a previously flagged Nigerian directive. Operation. Silence. He looked up at his team. "They're not here for talks." On the 3rd floor, Traoré stood calmly in the center of the West Wing conference room. The briefcase on the table had not been opened, and no documents were passed, just staring. Silent pressure. Subtle intimidation. "I'll step out for a moment," Traoré said, nodding politely. "Too much coffee." He left the room without a guard. He didn't need one. As he walked down the hallway, a palace staffer passed by and handed him a single slip of paper. It read, "Zida has eyes. Tunnel, Traoré. No hesitation." He moved swiftly down a restricted hallway, through a storage room, and pressed a panel behind a rusting bookshelf. The wall clicked open with the quiet dignity of history. Decades earlier, Thomas Sankara had commissioned escape tunnels beneath the palace, just in case. As the door closed behind him, the air grew cooler. The hum of chaos faded above. Back in the West Wing, the Nigerian agents shifted impatiently. One checked his watch, another gripped the cuffs. But when they turned to collect their target, the chair was empty. So was the corridor. Traoré was gone, and now they were the ones exposed. By midday, the sun blazed over Ouagadougou, but the streets had already caught fire in another way. Word spread fast, first through encrypted messages, then in shouted whispers at market stalls and bus stops. They tried to take him. They came for Traoré, foreign men in suits, cuffs in their hands. By 12:17 p.m., the first wave of students had reached the Place de la Révolution, carrying handwritten signs and beating empty jerry cans like war drums. The chant rose like smoke. Taxi drivers abandoned their fares to block major roads with their vehicles. Vendors shut their stalls and joined the tide. Inside the presidential palace, the Nigerian delegation's smiles had long since faded. Ambassador. Mimano stood near a window, staring at the crowd that now packed the gates. Colonel Okoro barked into his satellite phone. but no response came back. The extraction team had failed. Their target had vanished. And now they were prisoners inside a building meant to host them. Loyalist soldiers previously guarding the exterior had reoriented, subtle but intentional. Shoulders squared, fingers resting closer to triggers. Every Nigerian movement was shadowed. The unspoken message, "We see you now." From the rooftops, young Burkina waved flags bearing Traoré's face, their voices a wall of fury and devotion. Drones buzzed overhead, not for surveillance, but to live-stream the unfolding chaos to a continent hungry for defiance. In the control room, Colonel Zita turned to a junior officer and said flatly, "No need to arrest them. Let the people hold court today." And as the chants echoed through the capital, one phrase rose above the rest, louder, sharper, unstoppable. "Ouaga ne Abuja. Ouagadougou is not Abuja. This land does not kneel." The remainder continues. If you'd like the full document cleaned in this way, I can continue where this left off. And sometimes what a nation needed more than vengeance was vision. That evening he hosted a press dinner. Local dishes, soft music, relaxed laughter. To the world, it looked like a leader moving forward. But beyond the candle-lit tables and smiling diplomats, a far more serious meeting was unfolding behind closed doors. In a secure wing of the palace, Traoré sat with intelligence chiefs from Mali, Chad, and Guinea. No translators, no recordings, just direct questions and hard truths. "They won't stop here," said the Chadian general, voice low. "If one plan failed, another will follow." This was not just Nigeria. This was a test. Traoré nodded, unmoved. Then we passed the next one, too. Maps were unfolded, routes were traced, names mentioned. Quiet alliances began to form, not with signatures, but with understanding. Because what had just happened in Ouagadougou was not an isolated event. It was a signal. And while the world moved on, those in the room knew the next storm had already begun gathering. The headlines came quietly, buried beneath news of infrastructure projects and trade reforms. In Nigeria, President Tinubu announced a cabinet reshuffle. Minister Charles Bakar resigned for health reasons. Several intelligence officials retired early. Ambassador Nagi Mbaneo was reassigned to a consulate in Eastern Europe. No official link was drawn to the events in Ouagadougou. But everyone understood the silence was its own confession. In Burkina Faso, life resumed with a strange stillness. Markets reopened, roads were cleared, and the chants had faded from the plazas. But in the Koshian Palace, the memory lingered, not as trauma, but as clarity. One morning, just past dawn, Ibrahim Traoré walked alone through the Garden of Union, where trees from every African nation had been planted after the coup that brought him to power. Some were still saplings, others older than the palace itself. He paused beside a young baobab from Zimbabwe, ran a hand across its bark, and turned slightly as his defense chief approached. "They'll try again," the man said. Traoré nodded, eyes on the horizon. "History is quiet," he whispered, "until it screams." No press conference followed, no decree, no retaliation. And yet, across Africa, in boardrooms and barracks, embassies, and lecture halls, a question echoed louder than ever. What happens when a young leader refuses to bow, even as the world conspires to break him? The answer wasn't in a document or broadcast. It was in the restraint, the resolve, the refusal to fall into the trap of bitterness. Because Traoré didn't win by shouting, he won by enduring. And now a continent watched, holding its breath. Not for the next move, but for the next young voice willing to rise and say, "Not this time, not this land, not this future." If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful, true, inspired African stories that mainstream media won't show you. Drop a comment below. Do you think Traoré did the right thing by showing restraint? Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode, because the battle for Africa's dignity is just getting started. Share this video with someone who still believes in real leadership.